Boston, the winningest sports city this century. Each championship deriving from a plan. Join us as we discuss the next Boston Banner Blueprint with your hosts, Josh Finkel, Nick Walsh, and Nate Philbrook.
What's up, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Boston Banner Blueprint podcast. It is your host, Nate. I am here with Nick and PT for episode 24. This is all things Boston Bruins and the disappointment that they were this year. Starting off real hot and positive today. So before we jump too far into this episode and get started on our Bruins talk, we, of course, want to let you know exactly where to find us, and that starts on Twitter/X at Boston Banner BP, Boston Banner Blueprint on both Facebook and Instagram, and then boston.banner.blu on TikTok. Our content's going to continue to increase, and we're going to get more and more of that as we head into summer. So go like, subscribe, rate 5 stars, and share with all your friends and family. It does us a lot of good, and we really appreciate it and appreciate all of the help. So before we get started, boys, how are you both doing? Nick, let's start with you.
Well, I'm not doing too bad. Do you want to address one thing at the start of this from our Celtics postseason preview that you guys did that I was absent for? I was not in podcast jail that Fink wanted to put out. The craziness that he said I put in the group chat, all it was, people, was that I said that the Sox should not be losing 3 games to Chicago. Or at the time it was 2, but now we're up to 3. So if that's being crazy that you shouldn't lose to the team that was the worst team in baseball in the history of baseball last year, and out of 5 total wins on the season, 3 of them have come against Boston. If that's crazy, sue me. But other than that, the only other thing... Yeah, please. I don't have the money, and I got too many student loans to actually pay that off. But the only other thing I got is we're actually recording this episode Tuesday night, the day after Marathon Monday, Patriots Day. So if any of our listeners took the day to run the 26.2 miles yesterday, God bless you. You did something that I'll never be able to do. So I just want to say congratulations and hope you enjoyed your day and give you your kudos.
I like that. I was going to give you some flack with how you started that, but that was a strong finish. PT, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I'm with Nick on that one. I will never be running that marathon or any marathon for that matter. But anyone that did do it, congrats to them. But I'm doing pretty good, pretty stressful last few days. Final capstone projects for me to graduate college. So just presenting it today. And what better way to decompress than get on an episode with the boys, the Banner Blueprint boys. So I'm excited for tonight. How about you, Nate?
Absolutely. Doing well, man. Doing well. Things are warming up down here. We have some playoff hockey here in Raleigh, which we'll get into the lack thereof in Boston. But things are going well, and like you said, excited to talk an episode of Bruins hockey with the boys. So. First things first, let's go through their season recap. So just kind of give everybody a lay of the land. We're gonna go through real high level, essentially all the topics that we're gonna be diving into a lot more as the offseason progresses. But we're gonna give you a recap of how the season went. We're gonna talk about some head coaching vacancies and potential fits, as well as free agents, potential captains of the Boston Banner. Not of this podcast. We're all the captain. Potential captains of the Boston Bruins. Draft night, look ahead, and then we're going to give them a report card to wrap up our episode. So, Nick, why don't you dive right in, give us a little bit of a season recap, and we will start this train rolling.
Do you want me to go flush my toilet? Because that's basically what the recap of the season's going to be like. From Stanley Cup contenders preseason, with all the big moves they made, it was a complete and utter crap show of a year. I think we all know that like you basically had to sell off the whole team at the trade deadline. You basically punted, which where they were at the time was the correct move. I think we can all agree on that. But this season should never have come to that, and disappointment is not a strong enough adjective to tell you how the season went. And how they ended the year, the very last night, they took a page out of the Patriots playbook when they won Week 18 by going to OT and basically going from the 4th worst draft odds to the 5th. Granted, it's a little different in hockey where with the lottery system, all that one extra point did was basically you lost 1% on each draft slot. Is how the math worked out. So it wasn't as a substantial mistake as Gerard Mayo and the New England Patriots did against Buffalo. But at that point, a loss is a win. So in a year where it got to the point where you had to tank, they couldn't even tank correctly. So it definitely, since I really became a diehard Bruins fan back in as a 10, 11-year-old, however old I would have been in the spring of 2008, by far the worst Bruins season I have had to endure. So on the bright side, hopefully this is rock bottom.
Yeah, that was actually how I was going to start. Is there really wasn't many bright spots in this season. Expectations were high. Us on the blueprint are always in favor of go out, spend the money, surround or fill out your roster with talent, and a lot of times that takes moolah to do that. And so they did that. They went big game hunting this offseason, and they landed a couple of guys that should have been immediate impact players in Zadorov and Elias Lindholm. And, injuries were one thing. Of course, you can never predict that with Hampus Lindholm playing under 20 games this year, with a couple of, McAvoy, the way that his season ended, Swayman getting a late start due to contract negotiations just didn't help things. But something that I kind of wanted to point out too is it was very, very early that they made the head coaching change, and they made the call to switch to Joe Sacco and let Coach Montgomery go. Montgomery immediately goes to St. Louis Blues and turns that franchise around and puts them on the precipice and really, really reshaped that roster. And so not only was it a failure on the ice, but I think it was a failure of a season off the ice too, in the management of the direction and the blueprint of the Bruins going forward.
And I would just like to touch on that, where I know all three of us have our own issues with like the talk shows like Felger and Maz and Zolek and Bertrand and the EEI stations, like in terms of being negative all the time. I got to give it to Felger and Maz on this one in terms of the coaching and the statement that Charlie Jacobs put out the other day, and kind of like throwing Monty under the bus, saying how he wasn't prepared and didn't have much to like counter at the beginning of the year, and that's basically why they made the decision. Look where he is. He's in the damn playoffs with a roster that talent-wise is far less than yours, and at the time he got hired was basically in the same spot as you. He's in the playoffs. You're at home with the 5th worst record in the league. The coach you fired before that is already a Stanley Cup champion and has the 2nd best points in the West in Bruce Cassidy. At what point do you have to look yourself in the mirror if you're Charlie, Don, and Cam? Where how many head coaches are you going to have to go through? Because you were right to get rid of Julian when you did, and getting Cassidy was the right move. We can argue if Cassidy, when they let Cassidy go, was the right move or not, but you backed it up with a good hire in Montgomery. But with and I know Sacco had the interim tag, so he really, no one expected him to be a long-term fit. But you're now on 4 head coaches on this GM regime. How many do you get before it's your head on the chopping block? And Charlie, stop blaming the coaching.
They started, with some rumors as the season was winding down that, there was potential of some front office changes. And then I think was it Frank Cervelli that kind of put the kibosh to that. And he was the one that said that, no, those aren't true. Don and Cam will be back, which, to your point, those have been mainstays for a long time. And it's starting to wear thin with some of the decisions that they're making and the outcomes of those decisions that they're making. So the question that I want to throw to you and kind of start our head coaching segment is, does Sacco deserve a shot to be the full-time guy?
I think he deserves a shot at an interview.
He deserves a shot at an interview.
Yes. I don't think he's the front runner. I think you need a new voice in that room. But there wasn't much to inspire this year, but I mean, when you fire your head coach 20 games in or whatever it was, your season was already off the rails as it was. You deal with your goalie missing time at the very beginning and coming in late. The injuries, like you mentioned, with Hampus Lindholm and what happened with McAvoy, like Sacco was given a losing hand. Like, so I don't want to put that on him, but I mean, so I think he deserves to get an interview, but I also, in the same breath, don't think he's the one to inspire this rebuild. I think you got to get a new outside voice.
I'm with you there because, he's been one of the mainstays in the organization for a long time. I think he was hired under Claude Julien. Am I correct there?
I think you're right, but then he went away, but then he came back last year.
Right, but he was still in the system. He was with Providence before that. We should have that up, but I'm almost certain that that's the case. But
yeah, you might be right on that.
Fact check us if that's the case. Anyway, so he's been in the organization for a long time, and the pipeline and the blueprint of the depth of the organization is one of the weakest points. And so I'm with you that he was not given the best hand in order to succeed, but he also didn't do much with that hand in order to inspire confidence going forward. And so it's more of a body of work. It's more so looking at his entire body of work rather than just the subset of this season, which I think everybody can agree that, as the lead bench guy, he was pretty successful at his job, and he helped a lot of coaches enter this regime and have a lot of some immediate success. But then when it was his time to, make the final call, it didn't work out very well. And he didn't, in my opinion, he didn't really get the most out of the players that were there, particularly when they still did have something to play for.
Definitely agree with you on that one. But that's why I say limit to an interview, like give him a shot to actually sit down and talk and have him defend his body of work. Doesn't mean I have to agree that his body of work is enough. But I also don't think it paints a good picture perception-wise that the guy you basically made fall on the sword this year, you don't even give a look to, even if it's just one of the phony interviews. So I think he at least has to get an interview.
So if it's not Joe Sacco, who do you think it could be?
I want to preface this by saying I'm not sure if this is the guy I typically would want, because I want a new voice altogether, like someone that has no ties to the organization. But realistically, I don't think Don Sweeney and Cam Neely are going to do that. They're going to want someone they have some familiarity with. So, and I'm bad with college coach names, but Jay Pandolfo, if I'm pronouncing it right, from Boston University, is the name I've heard on Twitter as a potential candidate. He used to be in the Bruins system as an assistant, took the BU job. And I mean, if you want to look at a picture perfect Bruin, He just lost the national championship with 14 guys on his roster that are going to the NHL. If that doesn't scream Boston Bruin collapsing in a big game moment, I don't know what will. So I have a feeling that's going to be the pick, but we'll see. But if there's a name that I'm circling that I think has a higher probability than most, it's going to be Pandolfo.
Yeah, I mean, the ties are pretty obvious there. Admittedly, I don't know a whole lot about his resume, but that BU, BC, Beanpot coaching tree is obviously very, very strong and one that hockey very much respects. And so I can't imagine it necessarily being a bad hire. But one name that I wanted to bring up was a name you talked about completely outside of the organization. He accomplishes that, and he's been around the block, so he brings a certain level of veteran leadership in a team that doesn't have that leadership structure in place right now. But that's Peter Laviolette. That the Rangers just let him go right around the same time, or right around the time that the season ended. But prior to that, he was also with the Capitals, the Predators, the Flyers, the Hurricanes, and the Islanders. Played 9 years in the league. He's actually from Franklin, Mass, is where he was born, so he does have some New England ties. And just given the, like I said, the leadership, the outside voice, the experience, that's a name that I'd be, on the lookout for as taking over, in my opinion, completely biasly, one of the premier, coaching jobs in the sport.
Oh, I don't think that's bias at all. And the way I look at it, and I know times change, and like some franchises historically in some sports don't get recognition later on, but one way that it's always resonated with me is that Montreal is the greatest hockey city in the world, but Boston is the greatest hockey city in the United States. And you got that job open, a decent amount of cap space, and you got some pillars to build around. Like, if you're a hockey coach, that is the job in America that you want when it opens up. And it does. Granted, in the last few years, it's opened up pretty frequently. But if you got a chance to jump in there, it's not biased to say it's one of the premier jobs in the sport.
Yeah, and so I mean, we're pretty much in agreement there. And so really the leadership from the head coach is only just going to filter into the players that ultimately we bring in to fill some of the holes that have been left by the trade deadline that we had of shipping lots and lots and lots of NHL talent away. So who are some names that we should really be on the lookout for as we enter NHL free agency? Overview?
I think it goes without saying that center is probably the biggest position of need on this team. Where you thought you were signing a first-line center last year in Elias Lindholm, who turned out to, it looks like, to be a third-line center at best. If you're looking for that young superstar center hitting the market this offseason, I say last year, Leon Draisaitl didn't hit the market. As it turned out, he resigned. But that was the name everyone was circling prior to the offseason as the premier talent. There isn't a guy like that for the center. Every guy you're looking at is 32, 33, 34. John Tavares is probably the highest rated center coming into the market, and he's 34 and a half. Probably going to command. His salary last year was 11 even. You're probably looking at least 11. He's probably going to get a pay raise if it's going to the open market. That's not a name that inspires a team that's looking to get younger, faster, and rebuild. So if you're looking for that young guy, it's probably going to be a winger. And the name to look for is fellow Toronto Leafs teammate of John Tavares and Mitch Marner. 27 years old, going into his 28-year season, right wing, made just under 11 last year. So you're probably looking at 12, 13. He would be your highest paid player on the team. You would have to pay him more than Pasta. Don't know if they're going to be willing to do that, but if you're looking for a big splash this offseason, it's going to be looking at Marner, but that's if he makes the market and doesn't re-sign before then.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair to say that in terms of at least offensive players, Marner is without a doubt the top name on the board. You mentioned Tavares, and when he signed in Toronto a couple of years ago, from all accounts, it looked as though it was between Toronto and the Bruins. And so I wouldn't necessarily count him out, particularly given, he's the captain of the Maple Leafs. He brings that leadership style, and he would bring a certain level of just stability to a locker room that has a lot of upheaval. I hear you in terms of getting younger and faster. I think that they did that with the really changing of the guard and some of the players that they did retain. Middlestead and Minton are both guys that can pretty well burn. They of course have Geeky as a RFA this year, and so for a restricted free agent. And so coming off a 30+ goal season, I think that that's a guy that they really look to retain, given that, outside of Pasta, secondary scoring is vitally important and something they really need to get better at. So those would be some names that certainly would make immediate impacts. I just don't know that the roster is ready for it at this point.
Right. And the point on Tavares too, like when it came down to Toronto and Boston 5-6 years ago, whenever it was, both sides were in completely different situations. Tavares was the young 20-something-year-old center superstar. The Bruins were in a win now championship window mode. Tavares now is in the twilight of his career. We're looking at probably a multi-year rebuild if we're being realistic. So I just don't see the fit this time around. 5-6 years ago, absolutely. That's when you break the bank for a guy like that. But this offseason, I just don't see it.
Yeah, and if he's going to command a kind of contract like you just talked about in the $11 to $12 million range, then yeah, no shot. But if they're going to look at him as a 34-year-old, or if he's going to be closer to 35 when he ultimately starts next season, that's certainly going to depress that next contract, whether it is length or whether it is the amount of money in which he receives. But I don't know. I think that is a pretty natural connection to make. Now, granted, it's far from a surefire thing that he's going to leave Toronto, right? He's the captain. He went there because I remember the picture that was posted of his childhood bed sheets were all Toronto Maple Leafs.
Pajama boy.
Yeah. That he was all about Toronto Maple Leafs, and that's, they haven't had the success that they would like, which I very much like, that they have not had the success that they like. But granted, it's, in my opinion, probably going to be a tough sell to get Tavares out of Toronto. But the Bruins do have a little over $27 million to play with this offseason. There's a projected salary cap of $95.5 million, currently holding a little over $600K in dead money, so not terrible. But a couple of the mainstays that they have locked in. Obviously Pasternak, and then you're going to immediately flip to the defensive side that they have Lindholm locked in for a long time, McAvoy locked in for a long time, Zadorov locked in for a long time. Lohrei is also a restricted free agent, so that'd be a name that they would look to keep that depth with. But it all depends on where they end up in the draft and what kind of impact players they can ultimately draft pretty high.
Do you actually know when the lottery is by chance, just so we know right off the bat what pick we do get from the lottery?
If you can stall for just a second, then yes, I can look it up.
Yeah. I didn't mean to throw that right at you. It was just a thought.
It's definitely something that we could have had prepared.
Right. But when you just throw something off the cuff like that. I just didn't know if you knew it. I'm assuming PT you don't know either.
Tuesday, May 7th.
Tuesday, May 7th. So that it is coming right up. So we'll know within a couple weeks.
Yeah. And so, as you mentioned, the draft does work a little bit differently in the NHL as it is a lottery. And so Bruins being 5th have an 8.5% odds at a number 1 overall pick. If we remember back a couple years,
there's a chance.
Yeah, saying there's a chance. And what I was actually just going to say is the Rangers, before they implemented this rule of you can only you can't move more than 10 slots. So for instance, team 11 is the last team that has a chance at number 1. Number 12 can only go as high as number 2. And so before they implemented that rule a couple years ago, the Rangers had the 13th best odds to get the number 1 overall pick, in which they ended up with to select Lafreniere. So there's certainly a chance, is what I'm saying. And the Blackhawks didn't have the best odds either when they were able to get Connor Bedard.
Yeah, I need some David Stern NBA level rigging of this lottery in the Bruins' favor. Help out an original 6 team that hasn't been here in this position for a while. I believe the last number 1 pick we ever had was Jumbo Joe Thornton. So Bettman, rig it. I don't care if you get caught. Rig the damn
This
thing.
is the highest draft pick that they have since the Tyler Seguin year. So certainly a impactful position that they haven't necessarily found themselves in a minute. But
guys, I got good news for you. The Patriots, they messed up their draft selection, dropping from 1 to 4 in the last week. So that means the Bruins are guaranteed the number 1 overall pick.
Oh, I love it, PT.
Yeah.
Only
I would make that trade off, and I would trade that. I'd make that trade off in a heartbeat. And I love the Pats, but I would take a Bruins number 1 pick after this dreadful year. At least with the Patriots, when they went from 1 to 4, we still had the hope of Drake May. Right now, the Bruins have no hopes, and so I'd take the number 1 pick gladly.
Yeah, so a couple of names to watch, and we will get much more into this as the NHL draft begins to take shape. But a couple of names for us to watch is I'm only going to go through the top 5 because the chances of us having a top 5 pick are very, very good. But the number 1 prospect of this year's draft is Matthew Schaefer. He's a Canadian defenseman that a lot of the scouts have said that his first touch pass is Makar-esque. And so anytime that you're going to be dealing with the, top 2, top 3 defensemen in the world, would you put too many guys ahead of him?
Could you imagine a blue line with a Makar-esque defenseman, Charlie McAvoy, Mason Lohrei in a couple of years? Like, damn.
Well, I'm not saying he's Makar-esque. I'm saying his first touch pass is Makar-esque. He is very much a two-way defenseman, but he doesn't have the offensive ceiling according to the draft evaluators that Makar does. But his vision and his ability to pass the puck and move the puck along is Makar-esque. So I just want to be very clear there. That's Matthew Schaefer. He plays for Erie. And in case you didn't know, the last Erie to go number 1 overall was none other than Connor McDavid. Just saying. Number 2 is Michael. That's right. Michael Misa. He is out of Saginaw. He is a center and left wing, primarily left wing. He was the captain of his OHL team. He's a leader amongst his peers and a guy that has a really, really high offensive ceiling. According to some of the, the early pre-draft folks, given as much information as we currently have right now, not even know where the Bruins are drafting, that Michael Misa would be the top pick, even if the Bruins were were to get the number 1 overall pick, just because of the immediate fit and that he'd likely be able to make an impact as an 18, 19-year-old. So certainly a fun name to watch, but Porter Matone would be the next one, the next potential draft guy. That he is a right wing, also out of the OHL. He's a bigger bodied guy, plays very physically, and so Porter Matone would be, again, these are some names that we're just kind of throwing on the back burner for later on. But the next name that I really want to dive into is one that I just had a brain fart the last time we talked about him with Fink, and that's James Higgins, out of Boston College. He's a centerman. This is a real prospect that a lot of people are already connecting to Boston because he's at BC. He's a centerman, which obviously is an immediate need, but he's 5'10", a little bit on the smaller side, and he's an assist first guy. Through his first 31 points, 29 of them were assists. And so that's obviously a guy that certainly can rack up the points, but not necessarily put the puck in the back of the net in his game right now. And I don't know about you, but we kind of already have one of those in Elias Lindholm. And then the last one is Anton Frondel out of the Swiss league. That he is like 6'3", 180 plus pounds centerman as a freaking like 17-year-old. That he was very likely to be a top 3 pick this year if his season wasn't plagued by injuries. And so that's a guy to certainly keep an eye on. So again, Matthew Schaefer, Michael Misa, Porter Matone, James Higgins, and Anton Frondel are a couple of names for Bruins fans to be on the lookout for as we get closer to draft night. Yeah. Going back to current roster.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, what did you have there? I was just going to make a transition to the next topic.
I was going to say, in terms of being the blueprint and talking about prospects and offseason outlook, for how much we want championships in this town, at least for how we structure our show. I mean, in the span of a month or two, we're going to have 2 potentially top 5 picks on 2 different franchises in town, which we hope can quickly translate in the opposite swing of the pendulum, where they're going to be competing for championships soon again. But having 2 stud prospects coming in for 2 different teams, that part is exciting and is the one bright spots on shitty seasons.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And one of the best parts about that is it's not baseball with the number 1 overall pick, in which you select them and then hope that you see them 2 years from now or 3 years from now. Like the NHL, a top prospect can make an immediate impact. The NFL, a top prospect better make an immediate impact. And so, a lot of these are names that, again, do they have potential to make an immediate impact? Yes. There is no Macklin. Oh my gosh, help me out. Number 1 overall pick from last year.
Why am I blanking on that now? Bedard was 2 years ago.
Macklin Celebrini to the Sharks. And so, there is no him, there is no Connor Bedard, there is no McDavid in this year's draft, which sounds kind of similar to the NFL draft. But there is no generational talent, but there are a lot of really solid hockey players in this draft from what we're seeing. And so, of all drafts, for the Patriots to have a top pick in the NFL draft that's not super loaded, it is nice that the Bruins are going to get an opportunity, being at the upper echelon of teams, to be able to get a shot at a guy that can make a pretty immediate impact. But going back to the current roster, talking about leadership, talking about, what the next steps of the Boston Bruins looks like. We don't have a captain right now, boys. So who do you see as some potential fits? I mean, I think I really only see 2.
I see 3. I think our first 2 are going to be the same, but so we should talk about those.
And I think I think we're going to be in alignment on all 3 here.
Who is your first one? out of the two that you had pop in your mind, who were they?
I mean, one of the immediate obvious answers is David Pastrnak, right? He's
Absolutely.
long tenured. He's signed for a long time. Really,
he played this season when it went down the shitter.
Yep.
That was leadership quality right there. So that right there, I think he definitely is the front runner to wear the seat next year.
I agree there, and from a fan perspective, it's tough not to love what Pastrnak brings to the table because everybody loves goals, and he's really the only guy that's done it consistently for us for a number of years. So, second name, which I know we were in agreement on, what do you got there?
Charlie McAvoy. Like, there's just something about having your number one defenseman be your captain, and if he can stay on the ice, throw some hits like he did during the Four Nations, and take that next step that we all envision that he can and should. You don't give that contract extension a few years ago if you don't believe in him long term. I do. Yes, he's plateaued the last few years, but I think he has that next level in him. And in terms of internal candidates, after Pastrnak, he's next on my list.
Yep. Yeah, so we're in lockstep there. Completely agree. I would certainly like to see the sustained high level of McAvoy's play for a little bit longer before we're kind of handing over the keys of the franchise to McAvoy. But I like your idea of having it be a defenseman, brings back vibes of the Chara days, of course, and where a lot of Bruins success happened. And so hard not to like that idea. I think that you can't really go wrong with either of those two options. I don't think anybody in the fan base would be outraged if either of those guys was given the C to wear on their chest. But I'm curious, what is your third option?
None other than Brady to Chuck. Make a hockey trade. Get him in here. The moment he's in here, give him the goddamn C. That is my number 3 pick. Now, how likely is it? Not that likely, but I would drop my pants if Brady Tkachuk was wearing the Spoke B next year.
What did he say?
So,
You're right.
Me Brady. Bring me Brady. That's going to be my chant for the whole summer. Bring me Brady.
Brady, if you're listening to this, don't listen to this. I don't think he wants to come here anymore.
I was going to say, how do you feel as though that helps?
Brady Tkachuk is the answer to a lot of our problems. I don't care who you have to give up.
Yeah, and apparently ED for you.
I will drive them to Logan.
I just got off the phone with the Bruins front office, Nick. They're saying you're not allowed near the facilities ever again after these comments.
Well, I'm actually going to be in the Garden tomorrow night for the Celtics game too. So they better wait a little bit before we put this episode up, PT, so I can get into the building.
So, okay, first off, I love that option. I don't know how much of an option it really is because, like you said, make a hockey trade, and one of the names that you'd have to assume would be one of the other two guys that we just mentioned going the other way.
I don't care at that point. Brady, bring me Brady.
The way that he showed up for
that
USA,
should be the name of that should be the name of this episode. Bring me Brady.
Well, the way that he showed up for Team USA in the Four Nations face-off, I mean, he was absolutely electric. And yeah, he shouldn't be playing for a Canadian-based team, particularly one that hasn't done jack in forever. So I'm with you there. But I was just going to say, pending free agent or trade as the potential captain.
And not to say history repeats itself or will repeat itself again. I mean, Ottawa did gift wrapped us our biggest offseason accusation. Wow, yeah, if I can talk. In Zdeno Chara all those years ago, he came from Ottawa, immediately became our captain. It should happen again. Ottawa, fuck it up again. Fuck it up.
Yeah, as they're in the playoffs and Bruins are sitting in Cabo. But so who Like, who would be your pick? I know Brady would be your pick, but like internal options, do you have a preference between the two?
Pasternak.
Okay, me too.
Yeah. I think that's the easiest option and most realistic option.
I completely agree there. Now, what would you grade? We're going to move into a report card-esque grading system here. Given all factors, expectations coming into the year, free agents that were signed, draft capital that was used, management throughout the season, depth of the organization, we're taking a lot of things into account here. What would you give the Boston Bruins as a 2024-2025 report card grade?
So my gut instinct was to give the easy answer and say F in terms of what the expectations and everything were going in. I'm going to be a little bit more generous. So think when you listen to this, can't say I'm Mr. Negative. I'm being a little positive here. D-. Okay. And the reason why I'm not giving them an F and I'm giving them a little bit of a boost is because they didn't double down at the trade deadline. They cut the cord, what they needed to do to make the best of a shit situation. They didn't hold back. They didn't try to half step it. They blew everyone out the door that they could. And on one hand, something we didn't talk about in terms of the draft, we kind of have to root for the Florida Panthers for these first two rounds of the playoffs because we'll get a first round pick if they make it past the second round and Brad Marchand plays in 50% of the game. So we're kind of forced to root for Florida right now. But by doing what had to be done and not throwing bad money at a poor roster at the deadline, trying to add and trying to sneak into the playoffs and making that tough call, they did do that right. So instead of giving them a straight up F, I'll be a little generous and say at least a D-, which is still a fail, but it's not a complete F.
I'm with you to a certain extent. I'm going D+ from a sense of they did prepare themselves a little bit better than I would have initially thought for a rebuild. You know, they got a lot of capital. They got a lot younger. They got some really intriguing prospects. They got their prospects that they already had in-house, some playing time, some looks at the NHL level this year. I really do believe that, you know, getting a healthy McAvoy back, getting a full regular offseason and preseason for Swayman is going to make a big impact. For me, it's going to all come down to depth as we enter into free agency and the draft, because this is a team that needs multiple lines of scoring. This is a team that needs multiple lines of just NHL quality depth players that really they're a long way off from right now. But given the expectations coming into the year, I would have never in a million years thought that we'd be having this conversation right now. So that's where I'm with you that it's a failure, but it could have been worse. And so that's where I land on a D+.
What about you, PT? What's your grade?
You know what? I'm going to agree with you guys on this. Well, at least Nick, I'll go with the D-, I think. They have a lot to improve on. Obviously, a big disappointment from what they were expecting coming into the preseason last year. But hopefully we get lucky in the draft and we hit on some players. I know you guys have some people that you want to talk about with that, but yeah.
And to piggyback off of what Nate said about not thinking in a million years we would be in this spot, when a couple of our previous Bruins episodes saying with David Pasternak, Charlie McAvoy, Swayman, both Lindholms, there was too much talent on this roster for them to fully tank. By God, they proved me wrong. They fucking tanked. And I never thought they had the talent on the roster. They should have been middle of the pack at worst, but they completely bottomed out. I thought they had a much higher floor than they did, but apparently the floor was a lot lower because they I don't want to say exceeded all my expectations, but because that's the wrong the wrong end of the stick for it. But by God, never thought we would be here with the talent that they do have on the roster. Which, if you're going to spin around and play the positive side, you got a lot of building blocks in place already, as you said. So the rebuild really shouldn't be an Edmonton Oilers rebuild where you're tanking and drafting, and finally you hit on Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, but next thing you know, a decade's down the drain. It shouldn't be like this for us. We got too many building blocks in place where 2 years, 3 years at most, this rebuild should be before not only are you contending for the playoffs, you're contending for cups.
Nick and Nate, let me pose you guys with this one question based off of what you were just saying. You're saying team right now, they have a lot of talent, but they're just, for whatever reason, it's not clicking. What would you grade the team's overall talent right now before this offseason really gets going in the draft? Just from a talent perspective.
You got your terrific goal scorer. You got 2 high-quality defensemen in McAvoy and Lindholm. You got a top 10 goalie in Swayman, young and under contract. You got all 3 levels, premier talent at each position, at each level. But there is no depth. There is no center depth. So B-.
It's actually funny because I was listening to you explain that, and I thought for sure we were going to say the same thing. I'm at a C+, and I actually thought I was going to be the more optimistic one. So I'm at a C+ from a sense of I'm looking at it from Bruins roster construction versus the league's roster construction. There are certainly plenty of teams that their top offensive weapon does not even scratch Pasternak's elite level, that their top defensive option does not even sniff a Charlie McAvoy, that their goalie options do not even come close to a Swayman option. And so when I'm looking at the roster as a whole, now granted, every roster would always be fixed if everybody played up to their potential. But Lindholm and Zadorov, their level just needs to be elevated given the contracts that were given to them and the play that they've proven to see in the past. Now, that was something that I was concerned about when they signed Lindholm, Elias Lindholm, that is, initially, is he really only had 1 season of being a score first kind of guy, and at an elite level, that is. And so when he was coming in without those elite weapons on the outside to be able to feed the puck to, I was worried that the fit wasn't going to be as natural, but he needs to elevate his floor so that it elevates the players around him, given the contract that he was given last offseason and the kind of player that he can be. So I'm in the C+ range, plenty of work to do, but certainly plenty of building blocks to at least start with, to your point, Nick, on all 3 levels. Good question, PT. So as we wrap up our Bruins report card episode and really postseason preview, what are your final thoughts? I'm going to start with you, PT.
My final thoughts are the team has a lot of work to do this offseason, but I think if we hit on some pieces in the draft, I think the realistic timeline for this team is a 2 to 3 year rebuild. I don't know what the win. I don't even know what I'd set the win total at for next year. I think it's way too early to say, but I just hope we go out, get some people, and hit on some draft picks.
And to your point, for all of our listeners that want to keep it right here with the Boston Banner Blueprint, we're going to be keeping up with all the transactions that the Boston Bruins are doing and giving you guys our in-depth analysis on that, as we do all for Boston sports. But I think it's fair to say that we'll all be in agreement here that the roster as it is today is not even close to the roster that it will be next September when they drop the puck. I think there's going to be a massive change, and we'll truly see if Sweeney and co are up to the task. But Nick, what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts, I actually want to piggyback around to how I opened the show with my opening thoughts, where talking about the marathon week, where it has been 12 years since what happened took place, where is the lowest point of the city of what happened. But also it's a good time to reflect, because every year when this day comes around and this week comes around, it was also a time that brought out the best of the city, brought out the best of one another, of everyday people. And I know it's a sports cast and I'm getting a little heavy on this, but it's just a good time to reflect and think back to even at the worst moments, good things do come from it, and the way people looked out for each other, the way people came together. It's just every year around this time, it's a good time to think back and take a moment and know that as a society, as New Englanders, that there is still good that can come in the worst situations.
Gonna make me tear up. No, but my final thoughts as we close out this episode and bring some levity to the end of our episode is, for all those that have been watching on YouTube and are curious what my shirt says, I am undisputed the best doodle dad ever. Two doodles, Maverick and Ozzy. They're the best little guys that I could ask for. They're my dudes. But yeah, so best doodle dad ever, undisputed. Thank you very much. Go ahead and like and follow us on Twitter/X at Boston Banner BP, Boston Banner Blueprint on both Facebook and Instagram, boston.banner.blu on TikTok, Apple, YouTube, Spotify. Like, subscribe, rate 5 stars, share with all your friends and family. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. We are going live on X in just a couple of nights tomorrow, if you're listening to this on draft day, on drop day, to go live on X for the NFL draft. Be sure to join into our stream. We're going to have the chat open. You guys can ask us questions about what we think we're going to do at 4, and then we will go from there. But boys, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, and peace.